The Kansas Jayhawks were a victory over Kansas City on Saturday, away from probably becoming the nation's #1 ranked team. But is KU the best team in college basketball? Jesse Newell breaks down the program that hasn't lost since the opener to Duke and tells us what lies ahead for the Jayhawks on SportsBeat KC, presented by Big O Tires. It's December 13th, a Friday, and I'm your host, Blair Kirchhoff. Also, it's only been 2 games, but the excitement is building for Drew Lock as the Denver Broncos quarterback. The former Mizzou and Lee Summit High standout has won his first 2 starts, and Cecil Lammey of 104.3 The Fan in Denver discusses what Lock's success means for the organization. But first, here's Jesse on KU.
Jesse covers the Jayhawks. How you doing, Jesse?
Doing good, Blair. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. Hey, if Kansas gets through Saturday's game without an upset, chances are they're going to find themselves as the nation's top-ranked team when the polls are out on Monday. Is this the nation's best team?
Well, you're asking an AP voter, Blair. Just you happen to be asking one of the 64.
I'll go straight to the source on this.
Exactly. Privileged people out there that get to determine this and make every single fan base upset out there. You know, for me, Blair, they are not, just based off of my ballot from last week. And I had Ohio State #1, Louisville #2, and Kansas #3. Obviously, with Louisville's pretty bad loss this past week, Kansas will likely move up to 2 with a win over UMKC this weekend. But, you know, the way I do it, I love to look at some of the advanced metrics out there, the ones that look at every possession. And I think it's going to be either Ohio State or Kansas for almost every single voter. It seems like those are kind of the 2 teams that move to the top of the list. But the way that Ohio State has played against some of the very top competition out there, I don't think it's a bad decision or the wrong decision to put them at the top at this moment. But having said all that, from talking with Bill Self lately and hearing his comments about his players and then also his team, I think he's pretty happy with where his team is at right now, where his program's at right now. I mean, if you think about all the drama that's gone on with this program, you can talk about off-court stuff, you can talk about players, you can talk about, guys that stay with the team or don't stay with the team, and all those sorts of things that have happened lately. This has been sort of a smooth ride over the first couple weeks and first couple months of the season, where KU lost to Duke in the opener, which was unexpected, and had all those turnovers. Kind of the way they lost was unexpected, but ever since then, KU's just sort of cruised along. They've gotten a little bit better. Udoka's played well. The defense has been good at times. They won the Maui Invitational. So whether KU is #1 or #2, I think they will be #1 because they received a lot of the #1 votes last week and a lot of #2 votes as well. Whether they're #1 or #2, I think the most important thing is that Bill Self is pretty happy with the progress of this program and feels like, knock on wood, I guess, for the KU basketball program, they haven't hit many speed bumps so far.
It's not a bad thing to be ranked #1. Kansas has been #1 many times throughout the Bill Self era, and before then they finished #1 a few times in the final AP poll. And right now they are #2 in AP, but Ohio State did jump them in the coaches poll last week, I noticed. So Louisville was 1, Ohio State 2, and Kansas just by a couple of votes, 3 votes I'm seeing. Is #3 in the coaches poll. So yeah, I can see a split decision from the AP and the coaches poll if that's the way it goes. I don't know who Ohio State is playing this week and if they have a chance to be impressive again. But you're right. The win at North Carolina alone for Ohio State was eye opening. To go into the Smith Center and win by 25 like they did, that was really really interesting. And I think the Big Ten ended up beating the ACC in that challenge series or winning most of the games. So if for some reason Kansas isn't #1 on Monday, I don't think it's I don't think that Kansas fans will have much to complain about. But it is a nice thing. When was the last time KU was #1 in the polls?
That's a good question. It would have had to have been a couple
18?
years back at least. Yeah, I mean it was not last year, so it's been a little while for Kansas, and obviously they had some preseason expectations, both last year and the year before, so it might have been more recently than we thought, but it also sort of speaks to, for Kansas, just the way the program has been. I told Gary Bedore this as I was looking up the other day. It's, I've been around the program, I've covered the program, but sometimes when you go back and look at these things, it's just amazing what you're looking at. A lot of what we were talking about this past week is KU just won its 300th game of the decade. They're second only to Gonzaga when it comes to wins from 2010 to 2019. But, you know, I just pulled up a KU page to look at what their seeding was year by year, because Bill Self was sort of talking about the consistency and the success of the program. And, I mean, it's just almost silly. You almost laugh out loud when you read aloud the seeding that KU has gotten in the NCAA tournament here in this decade. I mean, let me read it off real quick. 2010, 1 seed. So you go 1 seed, 1 seed, 2 seed, 1 seed, 2 seed, 2 seed, 1 seed, 1 seed, 1 seed, and then last year a 4 seed. So that was definitely a down year for Kansas last year. We're not being able to say 1 or 2 over the course, after going down over the course of the entire rest of the decade. But it just really does make you stop and think and go, wow. I mean, the success and the sustained success in the regular season that Bill Self has had, and his coaching staff, and the way they've been able to keep this program at the very top levels for so long, it really is kind of an amazing feat.
Well, and of course they won the Big 12 in all but one of those years. Last year being the exception, but every year, you know, from 2010 on, and even the previous, several years before that, Big 12 champion for KU. So let me run down a few players here. Let's talk about a few different guys. You mentioned Udoka Azubuike, and he's shooting a cool 82% from the field right now, taking a lot of high percentage shots. Has he taken a shot outside of the paint this year?
He might have, but he probably shouldn't have if he did, just because of how efficient he's been and how good he's been when he is within 5 feet of the basket or whatever. And yeah, I mean, again, this is sort of what's rare about Bill Self. When you cover Bill Self enough, you understand kind of the patterns and the ebbs and flows of every season that they go through, because what his ultimate goal is he wants his guys as close to their ceiling as possible. And so he knows how to push buttons to motivate guys, and he knows maybe if they're struggling when to back off of guys. And so he uses, public comments about as well as any coach I've seen out there. And so it's a sort of a strange moment for Kansas, because when Bill Self is being asked about Udoka Azubuike right now, he just sort of says, yeah, he's doing great. And that's not something we're used to hearing from Bill Self, because he does. He always in his mind, he wants to challenge players. He wants to bring the best out of them. But like when Udoka pulls down 17 rebounds in a game after he's being challenged to rebound better, and when he's become a better rim protector, and when he's becoming a better passer when he gets a double team, and when he's making 80% of his shots, and at least occasionally showing that he can hit a free throw, I mean, what's there to complain about? If you're Bill Self, at some point you're just going to sound kind of silly if you got in the public and say, well, Udoka is not, name something he's not doing well, because for the most part he's doing about everything well. So for Kansas, this is really a great scenario to have. I mean, he's the sort of player that not many teams have. He's lost weight over the offseason, which seems to have made him more explosive when it comes to protection. His block percentage is way up this year as compared to his previous stints. And again, knock on wood for Kansas, he's been healthy. That's kind of been the big bugaboo for him. Is not that he hasn't been dominant, it's just that he hasn't been able to stay on the court. So far, so good for him. I mean, I don't think KU could have asked for much more out of him at this point. Maybe there's going to be, as I mentioned before, speed bumps ahead for him. But at this point, he's doing great inside. He's finishing at the rim. He's getting to the free throw line. He's rebounding. He's blocking shots. And he's also creating a lot of defensive attention from other teams, which is opening up KU for shots on the perimeter. And so far, KU's made a lot of open three-pointers because of him. So, yeah, I think they've gotten all they can ask for out of Udoka Azubuike. And if the trajectory kind of stays like this, I think Bill Self is going to be pleased for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that the fact that McCormick couldn't come up with a rebound, or not many rebounds the other day against Milwaukee, was because Doak was getting them all. I mean, it was what an encouraging sign to see that part of his game develop. In 18, when his last full season, the 17-18 season, he led the nation in field goal percentage, and it was the second best field goal percentage in NCAA history for a season. And if this pace continues, this would be the best at 82%. But it always occurred to me that for a guy his size, he wasn't, he just didn't dominate the boards the way you might suspect someone of his size would. But what a good sign to see him just go after loose balls and just come up with a good rebounding total. He just seems like a guy that should be in double-digit figure rebounding just based on his strength.
Yeah, based on his size, and you look at him and you say that's a monster of a man in there. And what it'll do for Kansas moving forward, if that does happen, is it makes it a little bit easier for Bill Self to put in a four-guard lineup. just because, hey, you know the advantage if you're putting Dave McCormick and Udoka Azubuike on the court together. We just mentioned what David does best, and this is what he does best. He's a great rebounder. And so if those two guys are sort of fighting for boards or kind of clearing space underneath, and you have two really good rebounders on the court at the same time, and maybe Udoka's numbers are a little bit deflated artificially just because he's losing rebounds to a teammate, which really is not going to hurt Kansas that much in the long run. But Bill Self, made a point to mention how Udoka was rebounding outside his area. It's something he's wanted to see from him, and just sort of the energy to go get the ball. I mean, I think a lot of times with Udoka, it's just, as you mentioned, it's kind of just having that focus and having Bill Self, as I mentioned before, push the right buttons, say the right things to get his guys motivated. And for Udoka, when he focuses in on something, he's usually pretty good at it. And that was the case definitely in KU's last game this past week when going up against Milwaukee. And something else to watch moving forward. I mean, it seems like I write about this maybe 3 or 4 times a year, but Udoka's made 11 straight field goals. So we'll see if he can kind of continue that thing going against UMKC. It's just crazy to say these sorts of things, but I wrote out on Twitter like, oh, he's made 9 straight. I want to get that out there before he misses one. And he made 2 more in a row. So we have these streaks with Udoka where, it's really rare for him to make 3 or 4 straight free throws, but it's not so rare for him to make 10 or so in a row consecutive field goals. So that's just the type of player he is, and this kind of the dominant force he is when he can get that ball down there within 2 or 3 feet.
Okay, so when did Ochai Agbaji become Steph Curry is what I want to know. The guy can't seem to miss from 3 these days. What a nice development in his game.
Yeah, he is a guy that could really help Kansas. I mean, if you look at sort of the pieces that they have, you're sort of getting what you think you're going to get out of most of the guys. Udoka is playing well. Devon has stepped up his game this year. And I wrote about that this week, just about how he is taking on more of an offensive load and has become an efficient scorer. He actually has made some of his strengths even better this season, driving to the rim, getting to the free throw line, things like that. Marcus Garrett's going to be your defender, and he's not going to do much offensively unless he needs to in a certain matchup. And then, Isaiah Moss is a sharpshooter. Dave McCormick's a rebounder. So all these guys you kind of have pigeonholed into these roles, but they're performing pretty well. But Ochai, with his athleticism, it just seems like there's more potentially there for him if he can kind of take that and seize it. And credit to him, he worked a lot on his shot in the offseason. I wrote about that in one of the preseason games earlier on, just about how he quickened up his release, and now instead of taking the ball, just envision this in your head, instead of going from his waist down to his knees, then back up to his waist and then over his head, now he's catching the ball at waist level and just going straight up with his shot with a high follow through. And that's quickening things up. So he can get his shot off a little bit more quickly. He has a more consistent release than he did a year ago. And yeah, as of right now, he's in that 40 to 41% range when it comes to 3-point shooting, with a couple good nights at home over the course of the last couple of weeks. So yeah, it's really big for him. It's really big for Kansas because Bill Self has mentioned this, where it used to be you wanted to have 2 good shooters on the floor at the same time, talking in like the early 2000s or, going into the early 2010s. The game's changed now. With Udoka Azubuike out there, it really is preferential to have 3 good shooters out there. And with all the attention that he gets, coaches have to take away something. And we heard this from Tad Boyle. We heard this from, Milwaukee's coach this last game. Basically, those guys said, hey, you have to try to game plan against something. And so, the decision is you try to double team Udoka Azubuike. And if Ochai's making shots, you almost just shrug your shoulders and say, Ochai makes shots. So that's a really big weapon for Kansas to have. If they can have that inside game be so effective that it opens up the outside, and Ochai Agbaji can hit threes alongside Isaiah Moss, then KU really could have something going offensively, and something even more so than they've shown in the early portions of this season.
Yeah, 9 for 14 the last 2 games, one of which was against a ranked Colorado team. I think he was 5 for 8 against the Buffs. That's a real nice development for Kansas. And we've gone this far without mentioning or really spending any time on the Big 12's leading scorer, and that's Devon Dotson. And it just seems he is probably the most consistent guy on this team, coming up big, scoring double-digit figures in every game that he's played this season, shooting 50% from the field, and he is the best free throw shooter. If Doak isn't the team MVP through the first quarter of the season, almost a third of the season, it's Devon Dotson. I kind of peg him as the most indispensable player for KU. Am I right about that?
I would say so. I think it's so weird to say this because there are high expectations for Devon coming into the season, but I think he's been a little bit overlooked just because everybody's been talking about Udoka, and rightfully so. You know, Udoka lost the weight. He's a rebounding monster. He blocks shots. Free field goal percentage is unprecedented basically in NCAA history. But if you take a close look at the numbers, like you talked about, Blair, Devon Dotson's averaging 20 points a game. You know, like, and the difference between Devon and Udoka is, we can talk about how dominant Udoka is within 3 feet of the bucket and how much attention he receives, which both of those things are true and help you run an offense. But Devon Dotson can do this on his own. You know, I mean, Udoka needs somebody to set him up. He needs to pass. He needs the ball to be flung side to side. He needs to create an angle, which is part of him, but also part of his teammates getting him the ball and making sure that he can finish those plays, because by the time he dunks the ball, his work is done. Devon Dotson, what he's been doing is, I'm going to drive to the rim. You know, I get an open alley that maybe Bill Self creates for me, but then I have to do the hard work of going to the other side and reversing it in, or figuring out whether I should, you know, drive right or drive left or finish with my left hand or my right hand. And he's just been so good. Again, getting to the free throw line more often this year. That's been a great strength of his. He's definitely upped the offensive load he's had to take on for this team, and while maintaining his efficiency and all that, you know, still while not shooting 3-pointers as well as you think he might be able to over the course of the season. So yeah, the up free throw rate, the up free throw percentage. His passing is okay. I mean, it still can get better, but you know, it's still just, doesn't have great vision, honestly, and he's not a great lob thrower. I know Bill Self gets frustrated by that he thinks that this team should have even more dunks than they have just because they don't throw the lobs very well. But I think what Devon Dotson has done, I wrote about this at the Kansas State Star this week, is just he's made his strengths better. So he's finishing at the rim better in half-court settings, and he's definitely upped what he can do when it comes to getting to the foul line and making his free throws there. So I would say indispensable absolutely for Kansas, and things will not run as smoothly if he ever did have to miss for an injury or whatever the case might be, just because he's the one guy at the point guard position that Bill Self really trusts, and I think he's also trying to become a better leader for this Kansas team. But part of the reason he came back to Kansas to show those leadership skills, and I don't think we're going to see Devon Dotson in Lawrence next season. I think he probably made a wise decision to come back. It seems like he's going to be an NBA player at this point next season.
Wow. Weakness, lob throwing. That would, if you're doing everything else well and you can work on your lob throwing a little bit, I think you're having a pretty good season. And the one, did he throw the one to Ochai, the other night? That was the highlight reel play?
Yeah, he did. And, honestly, it wasn't a great pass. Ochai got about waist high and had to reverse it in, I think. They put a little flare on it. But, you know, the thing about that, too, is it doesn't have to be perfect with Ochai, which is what we were talking about with the athleticism. It's just, I mean, man, that guy is so physically gifted. He's still learning the game. You can tell as well. Sometimes his instincts in transition make Bill Self, you know, want to throw things on the sideline just because it doesn't always look natural. But, man, Ochai, he can jump, he can run, he can leap. He is an amazing athletic specimen out there when he's on the court. And so for Devon, you're throwing lobs to Ochai and you're throwing lobs to Udoka Azubuike. These throws don't have to be perfect, you know what I mean? Like, if you put them in the general area, those guys can dunk them, and that's one advantage that Kansas definitely has.
All right, Jesse, let's take a break here, and when we come back, you'll hear from Bill Self speaking to playing at Sprint Center, where the Jayhawks will meet Kansas City, once known as UMKC, on Saturday. Strange tip-off time, 4 o'clock. But Bill Self addressed the sort of lack of energy playing in that building in Kansas City. After this break, you'll hear from Bill.
The biggest sale of the year is happening now at Big O Tires. Buy 2 tires, get 2 free on select tires in stock. That's 2 free tires when you buy an alignment and tire protection package. That's 50% off tires at Big O Tires. It's going on now, but it all ends soon. Buy 2 tires, get 2 free at all participating Big O Tires. Installation additional, plus shop fee of up to 10% of non-discounted retail price, not to exceed $35. Hurry, sale ends Monday, December 23rd.
Can you talk about your team's performances over the years since you've been here in Kansas City?
Sucks for the most part. We haven't played well in this game historically in my time here, well, we've won many of them, but they have not. Like last year, we crushed New Mexico State and beat them 1. There's been a lot of games, even going back to Kemper. When we played in Kemper, that were just kind of boring games, and there's not as much energy. And I think that's one of the challenges we need to bring Saturday, is to bring that energy. It's not that the attendance is poor. It's not that fans are bad. It's not anything like that. It's just that I think that when you get outside your building in a neutral site type setting, even though it's not totally neutral, but it could be this week, I think, sometimes people want to be entertained. And then when you don't play well or play boring and they're not entertained, I think it can become kind of a dull atmosphere, and I think that's kind of what we've had over there. We haven't had that problem in the Big 12 tournament, but certainly when there's more energy and that kind of stuff. But in this particular game, it hasn't been a great game for us as far as us playing well. Now there's some advantages of playing in Kansas City, obviously, that we like, but as far as us bringing the same energy, I don't think we've done that consistently.
Okay, Jesse, that was Bill Self speaking to a question about playing in Kansas City, which is certainly the Kansas Jayhawks home away from home. The very first game that Kansas basketball ever played was in Kansas City. They played probably about, 6th or 7th of their games all time in Kansas City when you add in the tournament play and regular season play. But I thought it was an interesting answer that he gave about finding, having to create energy and it hasn't felt like a home court advantage at least to him over the years. What did you make of his comments?
Yeah, I think he's right from being over there in a lot of these games. And I think he's specifically talking about this December game that happened. It's part of the season ticket package every year. But the Big 12 tournament comes and there's just a little bit different excitement. And when you get other fans in the building, there kind of is this one-upsmanship that happens. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Blair, when we talked about the Maui Classic. The Maui Invite is so great, and that Lahaina Civic Center is so great because you have basically half and half of the fans, and they start trying to outdo each other. And nobody's like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and watch a basketball game. Everybody's like, I'm into this thing because if not, the Dayton fans are going to cheer louder than me. And so I think what's happened for Kansas in this particular game is when they face UMass or when they face Davidson or when they face Oregon State or Washington State, it's basically all KU fans in there and all KU fans that don't have the same sort of energy or enthusiasm because they're not in an on-field house. There's not kind of all the ambiance that comes with that. And so potentially one thing I think that could help Kansas in this game is that I don't know if UMKC or Kansas City or whatever we want to call them is going to have a ton of fans in there, but if there's a little bit of buzz, a little bit of energy, that might actually encourage KU fans to make a little bit of noise and not be won by a very small fan base that's going to be playing in its hometown. So for KU, maybe this will kind of be a blessing in disguise, but I think that they play okay there in the NCAA tournament, and they play okay there in the Big 12 tournament, as it's been shown over the years. It's just this particular December game, a lot of times this has tripped them up just because it seems like it should be sort of a semi-home game, but it ends up being a completely dead atmosphere, and KU kind of gets taken by surprise. So we'll see if it changes this year against UMKC, and if there is a little bit better atmosphere, then I wouldn't be surprised if KU maybe in the future decides to make UMKC the kind of annual game there, just because at the risk of playing that game and losing, you'd rather just play an opponent that you know you can beat and maybe have a little bit more energy in the building.
Well, if that was the case, if there is some energy based on the opponent on Saturday, I think Kansas City would love to play Kansas at Sprint Center on a regular basis. Did you know this is the very first game Kansas City will have played at Sprint Center? The Municipal Auditorium has been their kind of off and on home over the years. They're back at Sweeney Rec on campus. And they played the old Mid-Continent tournament at Kemper Arena, so the program has played in the venues in Kansas City through the years, but never at Sprint Center, which opened in 2007. I want to say maybe it was the 6-7 season, and it's been a long time, obviously, for that building to exist too long. It seems to me for UMKC not to have played there. So it'll be fun to see that program in the building, a few miles from their campus. They're the Roos are off to a 5-6 start this season. They actually got won a couple of games in a tournament, beating among others George Washington under first-year coach Billy Donlin. Billy is former head coach at Wright State and replaced Kareem Richardson this year. It's they're just looking for some success there. Of course, this is a Roo program that's never been to the NCAA tournament. It's never been to the championship game of its conference tournament, and they're trying to find a new spark with a new coach. And their leading scorer, if I'm pronouncing his first name right, Javon White, transfer from Clemson, is their 6'10" player's leading scorer and rebounder, 12 points a game for him. I suspect we'll try to see what some programs do when they play in a game like this: slow the game down, try to win some win possessions by extending them, and then trying to get a decent shot toward the end of a shot clock. I think if you're a program like Kansas City that's a low major, and I don't know where they are in KenPom in the rankings. I expect somewhere in the 200s. That's the only way you can play this game, isn't it? You're not going to run with KU.
Yeah, probably not. And honestly, if you're a new coach, first year coach, like you talk about Billy Donlin being, this might just be an opportunity for you to do what you do and see how it fares against Kansas. That's a great opportunity, obviously, for the Roos just to face a school like that. And they've hung in with some other opponents. I mean, we have to mention that. They lost at Oklahoma State by 18. They just faced at Iowa State. That was a pretty close game midway through the second half at Iowa State. And so, for them, yes. I mean, if you look at what Kansas right now, Kansas has very good interior defense. And so teams, almost 50% of shots against Kansas this year have been from three-point range. So the last four opponents for KU have shot 33, 33, 34, and 35 threes. It's almost like you're kind of trying your hand at the lottery. You're saying, okay, well, you're not going to get layups and dunks against Kansas anyway, so you might as well fire from three. If you get lucky and they go in one night, then maybe you have a magical day and a magical result where you're pushing Kansas to the very end of the game and have a chance to win it at the end. It doesn't look like a UMKC team that really loves to shoot threes, so that's not really an advantage on their part. But they can turn you over a little bit. They're pretty good when it comes to steal rate. They, have done a decent job on the defensive glass. And as you mentioned, they're kind of in the mid 200s. This is going to be a rebuilding job for Donlin. I think he probably went into this gig eyes wide open, knowing what he was going to be taking on. But for UMKC, I just think you probably embrace the moment, play who you play your style, you be who you are, and you don't want Kansas to run up and down the court on you. You want to limit transition as much as you can, but you also have to be opportunistic. And if KU's going to give you some easy baskets, you might as well try to take them, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to score inside against some of the length that Kansas has. And as I mentioned before, the shot blocking Udoka Azubuike, who's been very good as a rim protector so far for Kansas this year.
Okay, so last time out, Kansas City actually led at halftime at McNeese State before losing by 9. First ranked opponent for the Roos since losing at Wichita State in 2017. Hey, Jesse, before we wrap it up, I wanted to ask you about a former Jayhawk who was in the news this week for his NBA play, and that's Devonte Graham. What an amazing game he had for the Charlotte Hornets against the Brooklyn Nets, where he dropped in 40 points, knocked down a lot of threes, brought his team back from a big deficit to win the game. I don't know how much of the Jayhawks in the NBA you follow, but this was an eye-opening performance by Devonte Graham, the second-year pro who spent a lot of last year in the G League. What's the story on Devonte in the NBA? How could a guy who was a second round pick and didn't factor in much at all last year turn around and have a game like he had this week?
Yeah, it's amazing. He might be made one of the stories of the NBA this year, just based off what he's done. And you got some people out there even lobbying for him to become an all-star. That's going to be very tough in the Eastern Conference just because there's so many talented players there. But when you're dropping in 40 and when you're hitting game-winning shots at Madison Square Garden against the Knicks, he's opened up a lot of people's eyes. And he's a second-round pick out of Kansas. I think a lot of what you would assume the downsides to him were brought up in the draft process, which was he was an older prospect. He was 23 when he left Kansas. He had a year at prep school. He was a good three-point shooter, but I don't think you would consider him excelling at anything outside of that. I mean, he was a good defender, not a great defender, and he's a good ball handler, but not a spectacular one. He's a little bit undersized defensively. Always have that going against him, especially at the NBA level. But I think what you've seen from him in the NBA is it's the value of shooting. And what he does at an elite level that so few people do is he can shoot threes off the dribble. And if you want to just list off guys that can do that and have that skill set, your list is pretty short. And you obviously start with a guy like Steph Curry, and that just makes it so difficult. I mean, if you watch his highlights and watch the defenders who are trying to get up on him, there's just very little you can do. I mean, he's acting like he's going to drive. He takes a couple steps in and then immediately pulls back for a 27, 28-foot jumper. And if you can do that, if you can make that shot, it's almost unguardable, and that's 3 points. And so for Devonte, however he's worked on his shooting or however he's trained with Charlotte, and obviously he got into a decent situation there, close to home, all those sorts of things. But he possesses a very elite offensive skill right now, one that I would say only a handful of players have to his level in the entire world. So that's really what's been the key to his rise and allowed him to maybe overcompensate for some of the other things he doesn't do as well. But if you can be that type of scorer and that type of playmaker for your team and give your team 3 points even when nothing else is going right offensively, that's a really good thing to have.
Yeah, and it's happening to a great kid. He was, I know for you and for Gary and everybody else, he was just a fun guy to cover. And heck, we know he's a great kid because he went to Raleigh-Broughton High School, and only good people come out of Broughton High School.
He's I hear he's the second best athlete to ever come out of there.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's at least the second best basketball player. I give myself, I'm number 3 on that. No. Pete Maravich's high school was Raleigh-Broughton. So
I was making Pete third.
Okay. Well, I will compliment accepted. So, all right, nobody covers KU basketball, KU athletics like Jesse Newell for the Kansas City Star. Jesse, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Appreciate it, Blair. Thanks.
Hey, it's Blair. Hey, we have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns we have to offer. And it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. For your convenience, your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. A lot of subscription services won't tell you that. They'll just sneak it on there. We just told you. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening.
Cecil Lammey covers the Denver Broncos. He's the host and football insider for 104.3 The Fan in Denver. He's a senior writer for footballguys.com. Nobody knows the Broncos like Cecil. Hey, man, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. And, it's a big game this weekend, kind of a litmus test for where the Broncos could be in 2020 and beyond.
Yeah. And a big reason that it's something of a litmus test is because of the quarterback. And I'll tell you, folks in Kansas City, we're small town enough here in Kansas City to keep up with all the former high school and college players that were, they were locally produced, and everybody's kind of is excited about Drew Lock at quarterback. I think that Chiefs fans certainly wish he was not playing in the division, but here he is, and coming to Arrowhead, playing in the stadium for the second time in his life. He played a college game for Mizzou as a freshman there, but he look, these last 2 weeks have been something else for Drew Lock, and I don't know if how has his success altered the way people look and think about the Broncos going forward?
I think it's altered it in a huge way. And it's just been 2 games, and no one's putting a yellow jacket on them or anything like that. But I think Broncos country has been re-energized by Drew Lock because of that game-breaking ability, because of his ability to keep plays alive, because there is a small dash. He's not Pat Mahomes. I kind of get mad when people bring up, like, he's like Pat Mahomes. Like, no, he's not. Nobody's like Patrick Mahomes. But Drew Lock has a little bit of that. Vic Fangio calls it athletic arrogance, right? Where it's the chips are down, I'm the guy to get it done. He's the guy with that big arm. He's got the athleticism to get to the second play, because the first play he calls fine, but it's all about those guys like Lamar Jackson, like Pat Mahomes, like Aaron Rodgers that can beat you on that second play. Drew Lock has that ability. Still rough around the edges, plenty to work on, but I think overall, this went from, a team where everyone was down, Vance Joseph for 2 years, everyone's down, Vic Fangio, it's not working. Fire John Elway has been said multiple times across the airwaves and across the fan base. Now, in 2 games with Drew Lock, it seems like there's this breath of fresh air, and people are really excited about what this future could hold, maybe even as soon as next year.
So Drew Lock starts against the Chargers, and they win the game. They got lucky on that pass interference at the end, and it allowed the Broncos to win that game and pull it out, and thought, okay, what a great story, and we all were happy for him in Kansas City. But what he did the following week at Houston was just jaw-dropping good, and that's what I think for me anyway. That's what took his potential to a different level. And tell us a little bit about his game at Houston. What went so right for him in the offense last weekend?
They kept attacking, with Cortland Sutton attracting a lot of attention, as I imagine he will from Kansas City on Sunday as well. You saw that Drew Lock spread the ball around, had no problem, didn't just lock on to one guy and try to force it there to Cortland Sutton, who was double covered for most of the day, and that's why you saw him have a rather down day. But you saw that Drew Lock was able to, keep his wits about him. He was getting beat up, quite frankly. The right guard, Austin Schlottman, was getting him killed on multiple throws. But it didn't change the fact that he didn't want to take the check down. He wanted to be aggressive. He wanted to go downfield, and he's got that arm where he can throw it at the last second, and he can fit it into tight windows. So you saw him stay cool and calm under fire, and you saw him become the first rookie in NFL history with 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first road start of his career. And getting that W for the Broncos was very important because it's all about keeping up with Kansas City. That's what, ever since Pat Mahomes steps on the field for the Chiefs, everyone's like, that's different, that's special, we don't have one of those. And the rest of the division, whatever happens with the Raiders and the Chargers, no, it doesn't matter. It matters about keeping up with Kansas City. And when you have a guy like Drew Lock, again, 2 games, not getting too excited, but you feel like maybe you do have a chance. If you build your defense, if you run the ball, like Drew Lock out there against the Texans showed you that here's a young quarterback that's willing to be aggressive, that will go through multiple reads, that will look for multiple receivers, and the moment isn't too big for him, even if it's in a tough, not a tough Arrowhead, but a tough place to play like NRG Stadium down there in Houston.
Well, we are all looking forward to Sunday's game, noon kickoff here, and I saw that you picked the Broncos, or I'm sorry, you picked the Chiefs to win it. I did too. It would be, boy, I tell you what, it'd be a heck of a story if Denver came in here and won, stopped their 8-game losing streak to Kansas City. Why the Chiefs? Why did you go with the Chiefs in this one?
Yeah, and I just looked merely at the firepower that is presented by Mahomes and company, and I wrote my game plan today. I actually have adjusted the score a couple of different times, but I'm thinking about 27 points for the Chiefs. I'm thinking about 17 for the Denver Broncos, and simply put, can't keep Mahomes down for that long. Chris Harris Jr. is going to be on Tyreek Hill. That's fine. Tyreek's still going to get his. The last game they faced off against Travis Kelce, and we all remember Mahomes knocked out of that game, so here comes Matt Moore. But Travis Kelce had the worst yardage total of his season so far against the Broncos earlier. You can't really keep that down. If Mahomes is in there, he's not getting 44 yards. He's getting 88 yards and a touchdown or two. So like just with that, and I've often said a guy like McCole Hardman, he's a sneaky play. If you're a fantasy GM and you're like, who can I add from this offense? Like McCole Hardman, it takes one play like it did against New England. It's one catch for 48 yards and a touchdown. So when you have Watkins, Hardman, Hill, Kelsey. Don't know about the backfield. The Chiefs don't really commit to running the ball anyway, but you just have those type of weapons at the disposal of Pat Mahomes. Broncos defense is solid, but there's holes to pick on and ones that I believe the Chiefs will, and that's why they'll come out as 10-point victors on Sunday, in my opinion.
Nobody covers the Broncos better than Cecil Lammey. Cecil, thanks for joining us, my friend.
I appreciate it. Anytime.
Links to the stories we discussed can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. That'll do it for another week of SportsBeat KC, presented by Big O Tires. Like all podcasts, we number ours, and this happens to be number 100 since becoming a daily enterprise. I wanted to thank those who have appeared on the show, especially the talented sports writers of the Kansas City Star. This show doesn't happen without them, and I can't thank them enough for their cooperation in making SportsBeat KC work. And then there are those on the other side of the mic. We used to kid around that the other podcasts would need to carve out a chunk of time to review their credits, and we just need a line to thank that day's producer. Well, that's still mostly the case, but the number of people who have contributed to the success of the show, well, you do need a chunk. So here it is. Thanks Kathy Lou, Leah Becerra, Derek Donovan, Jeff Rosen, Chris Fickett, Mike Fannin, Greg Farmer, Chris Oshner, Monty Davis, Todd Feedback, Neil Nakahodo, Rich Sugg, Jill Toyoshiba, Tammy Youngblood, and everyone else who's pitched in. Thank you much. We'll be back on Monday for episode number 101, and I already know the topic, Chiefs Broncos. We'll talk to you then.